So welcome everyone to DM Neurology Made Easy. I am Dr. Ahmed Subaira. Today we will recall few questions of the AIMS DM Neurology exam uh, so that we get few points from this recall questions and get ourselves motivated for the further upcoming exams which are due, and also keep our preparations in the right track for the NEET exams. And please don't get dejected how you performed in the AIMS exam, and continue with your preparations. So let's jump on to the first question. Which of the following is not a feature of early thalamic hemorrhage? It's an accept question. So every question there is some catchword. So in this question, the catchword is actually not is there, and the options are actually altered sensorium. It's definitely there should be altered sensorium because thalamus is the seat of sensorium, that is reticular activating system. It becomes a part of reticular activating system, so it should be there. So it is not the answer. Is a question is an accept question, so it is definitely not the answer. So whether it's thalamic pain, the sensory loss. So thalamic pain and sensory loss, you may think that thalamic pain and sensory loss is definitely associated with thalamus, and you may, if you are not sure, may mark the answer as ophthalmoplegia, because ophthalmoplegia is associated with eye movements, and eye movements usually starts with midbrain and pons. So you may have a tempting to answer as ophthalmoplegic movement. So what is the right answer? So here one more catch apart from the catchword, apart from the not or the accept question, is actually early. So what happens in case of a early thalamic hemorrhage? That is the importance. So read the question carefully every time you answer. So early thalamic hemorrhage, the most important feature is that it will be devoid of thalamic pain. It will be basically negative sensory, that is sensory loss associated with altered sensorium as discussed earlier, and also ophthalmoplegic involvement is most likely to happen in case of thalamic hemorrhage. So what are the ophthalmic involvement? So the answer for this is actually thalamic pain. Thalamic pain is actually a late feature. So the classical pain syndrome of thalamus is what we call the Dejerine-Rossi syndrome, which was described by Dejerine-Rossi, and it occurs due to hemorrhage in this area, in the dorsal and the medial part of the thalamus. The thalamus, as we know, has got multiple nuclei. So in the first week, this is taken from a study, it is less likely to have a thalamic pain, and it occurs later and may take even weeks to months or even years for the pain to occur. And if it occurs, it is very severe pain, very resistant to treatment, and we may have to go for higher medications and even surgical therapies to go relieve the pain. So let's see one by one regarding the ophthalmoplegic involvement. So it is associated mainly with horizontal gaze abnormalities sometimes, but it can be associated with a finding which is called peering through the nose. So the patient will be having thalamic esotropia, that is kind of a pseudo abducens. Abducens is the sixth nerve. So when it gets palsied or affected, we get a pseudo abducens like palsy will occur. It's actually not abducens which is getting affected. Thalamic esotropia is where there is actually, because of disinhibition of medial rectus subnucleus, there is disinhibition, because medial subnucleus is within the midbrain. Because of there is disinhibition to this medial subnucleus, there is overactivity of the medial rectus subnucleus muscles. So there is increased pull towards the nose. So this is nose. So there is increased pull by the medial rectus muscle towards the adducted position. So that will cause a kind of pseudo abducens nucleus like syndrome, where there will be thalamic esotropia. That is why we will feel like the patient peering towards the patient's nose. And what is this contralateral gaze deviation? The patient usually with a cortical lesion, that if there is a lesion, a stroke occurring in the right frontal region, the patient's eyes will be deviated towards the right side. So the patient looks towards the lesion. And but what happens is, in case of a thalamic bleed, is there is actually wrong way eyes. The patient, if having a lesion in the left thalamus, the patient looks away from that lesion. That is right-sided deviation. This usually is also hypothesis is that it is due to the irritative focus because of the bleed. That is why the patient is looking away. That is why it is called as wrong way eyes. So this is actually not the wrong way eyes. This is actually the thalamic esotropia. Wrong way is meaning, actually we think that in case of cortical bleed or cortical infarct, we expect the patient to look towards the lesion, but in case of thalamus, the bleed, the thing is that we get a patient looking away from the lesion. That is the wrong way eyes, just opposite to the cortical lesion. And so gaze abnormalities are there, and this was what we are telling. In case of a reticular activating system, there will be, if there is impairment of thalamus, there is actually impaired consciousness or awareness, which is typical of a thalamic hemorrhage. So we know the reticular activating system has got three columns. You have a lateral column, medial column, and a median column. These all has a pathway which empties into the thalamus and then projects further into the cerebral cortex. So if the thalamus get affected, then definitely it will cause a altered impaired consciousness. So that is the importance of thalamus. So this is the Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. We may have to go, the drug of choice is amitriptyline, then we go for carbamazepine. So if you have seen a few of my lectures freely available in YouTube, that is the Fine Neurophilia series, we have briefly discussed regarding the types, various nuclei of thalamus, VPL nucleus, which takes impulses, the sensory inputs from the one side of the body, except the face. That is a ventro-posterolateral nucleus, and from the face it is actually ventro-posteromedial nucleus. And now we had talked about the reticular activating system. It all projects into the thalamus. So where does it project? It actually projects into the internal medullary or the laminar nucleus in the thalamus. So the red thing which we see in between actually has projections from the reticular activating system. So that is the importance of this red area within the thalamus. So with that, we go into the second question. So Wadia syndrome is other name of which of the following? Is it SCA2, 7, 8 or 10? So before starting this was extensively discussed in Fine Neurophilia series on ataxia. That was about 3 weeks back before the AIIMS exam. So I needn't discuss much regarding this. So you must be knowing the answer. It is actually SCA2. And much was discussed about the contributions of Wadia, Sir Wadia in that series. And which of the following spinocerebellar ataxia is associated with chorea? So this is otherwise called Huntington's disease like disorder type 4R17, which is associated with movement disorder or chorea. And which one of the following spinocerebellar ataxia is associated with seizures? So all the scars are very important. I had emphasized in that module that scars are very important, and some scars has got specific pathognomonic features which we shouldn't miss and will be definitely asked in the institutes. And I had given a list of all these features which are specific for the numbered scars, and all these three came in the last AIIMS. So with seizure is actually SCA10. And the question here is spinocerebellar ataxia. In the recall, I got the option 1 as DRPLA. The thing is that DRPLA also is associated with seizures. So since it was SCA which was asked in the question, if it was SCA that is asked in the question, then the answer will definitely go for SCA10. So before jumping into the next question, I would like you to go through this clip where I had discussed deeply regarding the various types of SCA and given you the whole list. So now let's see what we have, just revise and recap what we had discussed in that. Harrison doesn't give much regarding ataxias. It's there in Bradley, but just first read through Harrison and then go through Bradley if you have. So who is Professor Wadia, sir? SCA2 is called Wadia syndrome. It's otherwise called Wadia-Swarmy syndrome. This is Professor Wadia, NH Wadia. SCA2 has been reported as the commonest dominant hereditary ataxia in India, and it has got slow ocular saccades, and that is actually highly suggestive of SCA. And since the patient has got peripheral neuropathy, the patient will be having hyporeflexia, and that is one of the characteristic feature of SCA. The other syndromes which have this kind of features are actually SCA1 and SCA3 and SCA7. And the eyes, what we say is actually oil in bath appearance of the eyes, because oil, if you put that is the slow movement of the oil in water, that kind of appearance is there in case of scar. So this is one article, good article by authors regarding Sir Vadia's contributions in neurology. Which one of the following scar has a pigmentary degeneration? I'll go to the answer. It's three types, but before coming to the answer, I will, before explaining the answer, which of the scar has got retinal pigmentary degeneration? Yes. So, as rightly said, scar 7 has retinal pigmentary degeneration. That's typical. That comes as ADCA2. Sorry, yes, ADCA2. And ADCA3 is actually pure cerebellar. And what is the specialty of scar 10? Scar 10 is associated with seizures. And n number of MCQs from scars should be expected. In ataxia, basically, the more high-yield topics from ataxias is basically inherited ataxias, and from inherited ataxias, autosomal dominant ones would appear in your entrance question. So scar with slow saccades, as I told you earlier, scar 2 is the one which you should never forget. That is Vadia syndrome. Others with extra features, like other, in scar 7, you would get retinal degeneration and spasticity, etc. You get such kind of questions you think of. It is a pointer towards scar 1 and scar 3. So vision loss, scar 7. And you know, HDL means Huntington's disease like syndromes, which are of 4 types. That is scar 4 is scar means HDL4 is otherwise scar 17. The patient will be having chorea just like Huntington's disease. Scar 12 is typical to have action tremor, and scar 20 will be having palatal tremor, and is also notorious to have actually MRI finding of cerebellar calcification. So that also could come as an MCQ. And scar 5 is actually is otherwise called Lincoln's. Sorry, spelling is wrong, written wrong. I just misspelled it. Lincoln's ataxia. And scar 6, as we have discussed, it is ADCA2. That is pure cerebellar. And scar with head tremors is 14, 16, and 18. And scar 2, we have discussed Vadia-Swamy syndrome. Scar 10 will be having seizures. And scar 13, mental retardation. And scar 8, just remember, it's actually, you know that scars mostly have CAG repeats. Scar 8 is having a different repeat, that is CTG repeat. And scar 10 is actually, we have seen the repeat, ATTCG TG repeat, that is pentanucleotide repeat expansion. And one exception to the scars having point mutation is scar 14. So I think with this, just 2 slides, you must have got 10 to 20 questions, MCQs. So study scar. You can read Kadilkasa's book regarding scar. I had just taken points from Sir's book and read multiple journals, and then only put nothing from my part. So try to read Sir's book and other journals of scar, because scar is a high yield topic. You shouldn't put it for later reading. Harrison has very little regarding scar, and I think MCQ point of view, you need to read more apart from Harrison. So after a detailed discussion of spinocerebellar ataxia, we will move on to a next interesting topic, that is limb girdle muscular dystrophy, that comes under muscle disorders. So next question is, which limb girdle muscle disorder or disease has both autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive pattern of inheritance? So as you know, LGMDs are divided into 2 types, that is based on the inheritance pattern as autosomal dominant and recessive. So which has both dual type of inheritance pattern? That is the question. This is a most unexpected question for this AIIMS entrance exam. So what would you give the answer as? Is it dysferlinopathy, calpainopathy type 3, FSHD, or myotonic dystrophy? So let's take a quick look at this video on muscle diseases from 5 neurophilia series, and then come back and try to answer the question. See, actually, where is calpain? Calpain is actually here, within the contractile unit.
if you see here. So it is actually in a textbook, it is written like this. This over this calpain. So calpain is LGMD2A. So LGMDs are divided into LGMD1 and LGMD2. LGMD1 is actually autosomal dominant types, and LGMD2 is actually autosomal recessive. And previously, LGMDs were actually dominant ones were actually 7 to 8 of them, and the autosomal recessive ones were actually 23 of them. And it was named according to the how it was order of their discoveries. Nothing related to any other criteria, just the order of discoveries. So LGMD, first one which was identified, 1A was myotoniopathy, 2A was calpainopathy. So that was the order of discovery which was given. Right now, from 2018, European Union has of muscle disorders has reclassified it. They have reclassified as type 1 has been reclassified as D, dominant ones, and recessive as LGMDR. So just know that. So calpain still remains LGMD. So you can see calpain here also. That is one problem, because there is an autosomal dominant variety of calpainopathy also. So since we are talking, to tell that also, just for your knowledge. So these are the right now 24 varieties of autosomal recessive, and nearly 8 varieties are there for autosomal dominant.
So now you must have got the answer. The answer is calpainopathy. So coming to the sixth question, a patient presented with cognitive decline with a movement disorder, that is chorea, and MRI showed bilateral caudal atrophy. So which trinucleotide repeat do you think will result in this kind of MRI finding and the disease? So what disease are we talking about, and what is the trinucleotide repeat which we are expecting in the patient? So as you know, this has been repeatedly asked in many entrants. I had discussed and asked again and again in my mock exams which we had conducted. So this is regarding bilateral caudate atrophy which we find in Huntington's disease. So the question is, what is the trinucleotide repeat which we find in Huntington's disease? This also is found on, taken directly from my PowerPoint presentation which I presented in one of my lectures on Friedreich's ataxia and all. So just know that Huntington's disease, CAG repeat, FA. This could be your next question. So study this by heart. As myotonic dystrophy would be a CTG repeat. Apparently, this was discussed 2 days before the exam. That is H reflexes seen in. So the question asked by me was actually, which one of the among the following is not a late response in nerve conduction study? The question in the exam was actually H reflexes seen in which of the technical, is it an EMG, that is electromyography, nerve conduction study, electroencephalography, or a repetitive nerve stimulation? So the question in the module on peripheral neuropathy was which is a late response. So in a peripheral nerve stimulation, to find out whether it is a axonopathy or demyelination or any other problem, we look into certain waves. So M wave, H reflex, F wave, A wave. H reflex, F wave and A wave are actually late responses. So what happens is, when we stimulate a nerve which further causes a muscle contraction, the immediate response is called the M wave, which produces a CMAP amplitude. But it has a retrograde conduction which moves back to the anterior horn cell and then comes back. That is actually, this is actually a motor response. So that is called the F wave. F means, the full form of F is, that is, the F wave was first studied in the foot. That is why it is just called F wave, foot. And regarding H reflex, it is actually, this one is studied in the motor part, and H reflex was studied in the 1A fibers, that is the sensory fibers. So H reflex is otherwise called Hoffmann reflex, and it is actually the ankle reflex equivalent of, that is clinically ankle reflex equivalent of the electrophysiological H reflex. So this is the M wave, which is the direct reflex or the immediate reflex. H wave, F wave are the late responses, and one more reflex is actually the axon response, which comes or falls in between the F wave and the uh, CMAP amplitude or the M wave. So you must have answered that question very easily, that the H reflex is found in or elicited in the nerve conduction study. In case of demyelination, there is prolongation of F wave that is similar to prolongation of distal latency. So about biostatistics, this entity of number needed to treat, we discussed on a case-based scenario that is from a direct question which was taken from Harrison. Harrison, part in stroke, had directly discussed regarding one case on number needed to treat from on carotid stenting. So I'll just go to that part of discussion on stroke module, so that it was clearly discussed during that module, and then come to the answer. Question was what is the formula? So the number needed to treat, let's see, and then come back.
Criteria. When the patient was, it was a comparison between medically managed, that is just with statin and antiplatelets, and the patient managed with both medical and carotid endarterectomy was done. And we found that 26% of the patients who were medically managed developed stroke. Only 9 developed stroke in the carotid endarterectomy group. So actually the absolute risk reduction or the ARR in this patient is 17. So 17, how will you get? Actually it is 26 minus 9, that is 17. So the risk reduction with carotid endarterectomy was 17%. And how you calculate the number needed to treat is by dividing this with absolute risk reduction. So number needed to treat is, you can find by subtract the risk of both modalities, divided 1 by this will give you actually the number needed to treat. What is this importance of this importance of this number needed to treat? As we said, actually in case of NASET trial, they showed that number needed to treat is 7. We just need to treat 7 patients to get a benefit, that is to avoid stroke in that patient. Maybe 6 of them may not get benefit, but definitely the less number of patients needed to be treated to get benefited. For example, we are giving atorvastatin and statins left and right to for all cardiac as well as stroke patients. So number needed to treat it for this is actually 100. Even then we are giving. So that is an importance of number needed to treat. So it is not to confuse you. It is just because this has come in the recent exam, that number needed to treat, the risk reduction, absolute risk reduction, and the same sentence, that the question of that, the structure of the question, the same wordings were taken from Harrison and not from anywhere else. Because the problem is that when we start reading Harrison, if you take a topic example for stroke, we start with the epidemiology, pathophysiology, clinical features, investigations, and by the time we read treatment, we may just go with just the treatment and not understand these trials and numbers. And these trials and numbers are recently emphasized in all the institute exams and also have come in the NEET exam. So that is why I wanted to highlight that point with this question.
And before going to the exam 2 days prior, I had given you tips. And in the tips, what all to study in biostatistics, I had told you to study such and such things. So I had specifically asked you to study positive predictive value. Just see the few experts from the tips, and then they will go into the detailed explanation of how to come and arrive at a this formula for positive predictive value.
About the biostatistics part, you should not miss this part in case of AIIMS exam. Because some exams of AIIMS, if you see the pattern, if you see the past 6 AIIMS papers, biostatistics have got a relevant portion in the most of the exam, except a few they have missed to add few questions in biostatistics. So you cannot study A to Z of biostatistics, but basic things you know, that is sensitivity, specificity, etc. you know. But biostatistics, what they emphasize is, or what they want is actually the trial part of biostatistics, especially in neurology. So basic things, what they would expect you to know is the number needed to treat, the odds ratio, relative risk, the positive predictive value, the negative predictive value, etc., which you can study from the necessary books, that is the PSM, that is community medicine books.
So what is the answer for this positive predictive value? So previous question, you must have got the answer that number needed to treat is 1 by absolute risk reduction. So now positive predictive value, what is the answer? So let's sensitivity is total positive by total positive plus false negative. So should we by heart all these things, all this total positive, total negative, etc., etc.? I think let's see how we can derive at an answer. So every time when you get an answer, when you get a question or regarding sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, rather than by hearting this formula, you should directly go into drawing a four square table. And after that, in the top part of the table, just write reality, or in the disease. The God has given the disease, or in reality the patient has got a disease, whether that is present or not, and whether we as humans, our doctors or technicians, are testing for the disease, and whether we are getting it as positive and negative. So if the patient is having a disease and we are getting it as positive, then it's true positive. And if patient is not having a disease and we are also testing and ruling out the disease, then it is true negative. Otherwise, if your patient is positive and we are not getting test positivity, or test is coming as negative, it is a dangerous scenario. For example, patient is corona positive and we are getting as negative, then it is actually false negative. The patient can still be infected. And another scenario is patient is falsely being tested and claimed to be or reported as positive, that is false positive. So write these in a box. Now go by the certain mnemonics I will try to teach you or tell you, advise you to learn, so that you don't get confused during the pressure and don't waste your precious time during your exams. You know all this sensitivity. Sensitivity is used to rule out a disease, that is snout. Remember as snout and snout. So sensitivity rules out the disease. So snout and the other rules in which rules in the disease is actually spin. Rules in the disease is spin. So at screening test should be more. So that I'll write once more. Snout. Sensitivity rules out the disease and specificity rules in the disease. So and screening test should be more sensitive, and diagnostic confirmatory test should be more specific. So that is regarding sensitivity, specificity. So how to come to a diagnosis? So let's see. So again the table I will draw so you get more thorough. So you got right total positive, true positive, true negative. We have false positive here, false negative here. There is no confusion regarding. So sensitive. If you are sensitive in life, what will happen? You will most probably go down in life. People will take advantage of you. You will be going down in life. So sensitivity is, so any value in biostatistics is that there is x by x plus 5 y. So in sensitivity, you go that arrow is coming down. So take the x-axis here. So x is, so total positivity by total positivity plus false negativity. This is sensitivity. So even in life, if you are sensitive, you are going to come down in life. So the arrow is pointing down. So TP by FN. And in case if you are specific, if you are more specific in your goals, if you want to be in AIIMS, if you want to be in NIMHANS, if you want to be in your nearest prestigious college within your hometown, Trivandrum Medical College, Guwahati Medical College, etc., etc., then you are definitely going to reach high up in your life, achieve your goal. So you are going to go up. So that is specific. Be specific, don't be vague. Then that is specificity, is true negative by true negative plus false positive. That is specificity. Now comes positive predictive value. This looks at the efficiency or looks at the test results. So we are testing one patient. So this is test positive, test negative, disease positive, disease negative. So we are looking at the test. So positive means, it is going forward here. So it is positive predictive value would definitely mean that it is equal to, it is positive, it is going in the positive direction. I'm poor in drawing, sorry for that, but hope you are understanding. This is actually true positive plus false positive. Now you hope you understand true positive. Just look at the arrow, it is going in the positive direction, true positive. So it just shows that the true positives among the test positives. So test came as positive, but out of which how many had actual disease? That is the question what we answer with the positive predictive value. And also we can, same way we can answer negative predictive value. It is going in the negative direction, that is this way. Oh, sorry. Okay, this way. So this way. Okay, this way. Arrow is going in this direction. So so that was true negative. It will be coming like true negative by true negative plus false negative. So hope you got it. True negative plus by true negative plus false negative. So it shows that how many are true negative among the total negative. So how efficiently we truly ruled out that the patient doesn't have a disease. So all are important in the clinical scenario. So positive predictive value, now we got the value, that is go in the positive direction, true positive by true positive plus false positive. So all the test with results which out of the total test results which came as positive, how many were actually having the disease, are truly having the disease. That is the thing. So I think I was able to help you understand few biostatistics. All must be already knowing it, no problem, but just a revision would help. And one more thing I'll help you with is actually, remember the snout, spin, then screening test is should be more sensitive, and diagnostic test should be more specific. These are all MCQs. Then one more thing I'll tell you, that positive predictive value depends on the prevalence of a disease. So a test result becoming positive will be interpreted by a clinician in very different way based on the prevalence of the disease in that place or state. So for example, if that place has a highly prevalent high prevalence of the disease, for example, some area it is 5% prevalence, some area it is 25% prevalence, then positive predictive value will be more in case of 25% prevalent, highly prevalent area, and less in case of low prevalence. So positive predictive value is highly dependent on the prevalence of the disease. That also you should keep in your mind. So these are further MCQs which could come in next AIIMS, NIMHANS or NEET, etc. So just study on this skeleton and learn. So with that, we'll go to the 10th question. What is the dose of alteplase for a person who weighs 106 kg? By the time now you would have calculated 0.9 is the actual value, 0.9 milligram per kilogram into 106 equal to, okay, this is the answer. So first answer wrong, supposedly correct answer would be given as option A, and you will mark and you will think you have gone right. So this is actually a repeat question I had given you multiple times in the mock exams about this. Last AIIMS also, I think one of the AIIMS it was asked. So this is to emphasize that it is 90 milligram is the maximum dose of alteplase, beyond which there is a bleeding risk. So even if in 200 kg patient, we don't go for above 90 dose, and that is the thing. So that is regarding. So before stopping, I would that is regarding all the MCQs. Not all the MCQs. I just wanted to start with these. We'll continue this series with further MCQs and explanation. This is not meant to give you questions regarding recall questions and all. This is to motivate you. Don't get dejected by or feel bad that you couldn't answer and of the aim about the AIIMS questions, about the toughness, how you got confused and marked it wrong. just to keep you motivated, continue your studies even during this corona times. If you have to go to your work, you continue your work. Whenever you get time, you continue your studies. But being a doctor is your duty, so you have to do this side by side, whatever it is, because our whole world is going through a very tough time, and you have to keep your mind and also your health in safe, and also your family and relatives health, as well as your patient health safer. So be careful, stay safe, stay healthy, and there will be a silver lining. So be hopeful and study hard. So I'll come up with the series based on the response of this video, because I have put in lot of efforts, you will be knowing from this video. So I would make a video based on the response of this video. So with that, I'll call it a day. So thanks everyone for and subscribe to this channel, like, share. I have started a Facebook page which has questions. You can come and join the Telegram group if you are aspirant, DM Neurology aspirant. Okay. So thank you all. Video.